The thundering hooves of a desperate posse echoed across the dusty plains of Placerville, California, as Clara Reed clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. The year was 1869, and the golden promise of the West had turned to bitter ash in her mouth. She stood at the edge of town, watching the approaching riders with a mixture of dread and resignation, knowing that once again she would have to flee. Clara's breath caught as she recognized the leader of the group, her late husband's business partner, a cruel man who claimed she owed him a fortune. With nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring, she ducked into the nearest building, a saloon with peeling paint and the faint scent of stale whiskey. "You can't hide in here, madam," a deep voice rumbled behind her. Clara whirled around, coming face to face with a tall man whose sun-weathered face spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, regarded her with curiosity rather than judgment. "Please," she whispered, pressing herself against the wall as the sound of horses grew louder outside. "I need just a moment." The man, clearly the owner of the establishment, glanced toward the swinging doors, then back at Clara. Without a word, he gestured toward a back room. "Kitchen's through there. They won't look for you there." Gratitude flooded through her as she darted into the kitchen, heart hammering against her ribs. Through the thin walls she could hear the commotion as the posse entered the saloon. "Levy, seen a woman come through here. Dark hair, blue dress." The voice belonged to Jasper Hammond, her late husband's ruthless partner. "Can't say that I have," the saloon keeper Levy replied evenly. "Been busy with inventory." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling her panicked breathing as she listened to the men argue, then eventually leave. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance did she allow herself to relax slightly. The door to the kitchen creaked open and Levy stood there, his broad shoulders filling the frame. "They're gone for now," he said, his voice gentler than she expected from a man of his imposing stature. "But they'll be back. You got a story to tell, madam?" "I." Clara swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "I'm afraid I have no way to repay your kindness." Levy Crawford considered her for a long moment before offering a weathered hand to help her up from where she'd crouched behind a barrel. "How about a name first? That'd be payment enough for now." "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Reed." "Well, Miss Reed," he said, guiding her to a chair in the corner of his kitchen, "I reckon you could use a hot meal and a moment's peace before you decide what comes next." As he busied himself stoking the wood stove, Clara studied him. He moved with the confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, but there was a gentleness to his actions that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Levy paused, considering her question with the same thoughtfulness he seemed to give everything. "Out here, folks need to look out for one another," he said simply. "World's hard enough without turning your back on someone in trouble." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. It had been so long since anyone had shown her basic kindness. After her husband Thomas's death 6 months ago, she discovered not only that they were deeply in debt, but that his business partner Hammond claimed she owed him everything Thomas had borrowed, with interest that seemed to grow by the day. "Those men," she began hesitantly, "they believe I owe them money. My husband, he died owing debts I knew nothing about." Levy nodded, not seeming surprised. "Hammond has a reputation, not a good one." He stirred a pot of stew, the savory aroma filling the small kitchen. "Been running folks out of town for years when they can't pay what he claims they owe." "I have nothing," Clara admitted, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. "Everything was sold to cover the debts, but Hammond says it wasn't enough." Levy set a steaming bowl before her, along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat," he encouraged. "Problems seem smaller on a full stomach." Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. She took a tentative bite, then another, hunger overcoming her hesitation. "I don't know what to do," she confessed between mouthfuls. "I've been running for weeks, taking odd jobs when I can, but Hammond always finds me." Levy settled into a chair across from her, his own bowl untouched. "What were you before all this?" The question caught her off guard. Before you were a woman on the run. What did you do? What were you good at?" Clara's fingers traced the worn edge of the table. "I taught school back in Missouri before I married Thomas, and I kept the books for his store." A bitter smile touched her lips, though clearly not well enough to see what was happening. Levy's eyes lit with interest. Teaching and numbers, both valuable skills in Placerville. For the first time in months, Clara felt a flicker of hope. "Are you suggesting I could find work here?" "Possibly." He nodded thoughtfully. "Town's growing. The gold rush brought folks, and even though the easy pickings are gone, people stayed, built lives, families with children who need schooling." The hope dimmed as quickly as it had appeared. "But Hammond has power because people fear him," Levy acknowledged. "But he's not the law, and he's made enemies." A knock at the back door made them both freeze. Levy motioned for Clara to stay quiet as he moved to answer it. Relief washed over his features as he opened the door to reveal a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Martha," Levy greeted. "Perfect timing." The woman stepped inside, her gaze immediately finding Clara. "This the young lady Hammond's after?" she asked without preamble. Clara felt her breath catch, but Levy's reassuring nod eased her fear. "Martha Wilson runs the boarding house," he explained. "And she despises Hammond more than anyone in town." Martha sniffed. "Man foreclosed on my sister's place last winter. She died of pneumonia a month later, living in a tent." She studied Clara with shrewd eyes. "Levy says you need somewhere safe to stay." I have nothing to give in return," Clara admitted, the familiar words catching in her throat. Levy's voice was firm. "Give it a chance, Clara. Give Placerville a chance." Something in his steady gaze made her nod slowly. "All right." Martha's practical voice cut through the moment. "Good. I've got a small room at the back of my house. Hammond's men rarely come to that part of town, too respectable for their tastes." She gathered Clara's shawl, handing it to her. "We'll go now while they're still searching the north end." As Clara stood to follow Martha, she turned to Levy. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll repay you." A smile creased his weathered face. "Just be at the back door tomorrow at dawn. Kitchen needs help and I pay fair wages." For the first time in months, Clara felt something other than fear. It wasn't quite hope yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. She nodded, following Martha into the gathering dusk, feeling Levy's gaze on her back long after they'd turned the corner. Martha's boarding house sat on a quiet street lined with modest homes. Unlike the saloon's worn exterior, the two-story clapboard structure was meticulously maintained, with curtained windows and a small front garden struggling against the California heat. "It's not much," Martha said as she showed Clara to a tiny room off the kitchen, "but it's clean and Hammond's men won't look for you here." The room contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small chest for belongings. To Clara, who had been sleeping in stables and abandoned shacks for weeks, it looked like paradise. "Thank you," she whispered, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. "I promise I'll find a way to pay you properly." Martha waved away her words. "Levy vouched for you, that's enough for now." Her eyes softened slightly. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early and that man runs his kitchen with military precision." After Martha left, Clara sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. For the first time since Thomas's death, She allowed herself to cry not from despair, but from the shocking realization that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone after all. Dawn arrived with golden fingers of light creeping through the small window. Clara had slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by Hammond's sneering face, but she rose with determination. Martha provided a simple breakfast and directions to the saloon's back entrance. "Be careful," the older woman warned. "Hammond's not one to give up easily." Clara nodded, grateful for the plain brown dress Martha had loaned her, far less conspicuous than her faded blue one. She navigated the quiet morning streets, heart racing whenever she heard approaching footsteps, but reached the saloon without incident. True to his word, Levy was waiting at the back door. In the clear morning light, she could see him properly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "You came," he said, and something in his tone suggested he hadn't been entirely certain she would. "I gave my word," Clara replied, "and I need the work." He nodded approvingly, holding the door for her. "Kitchen first, then we'll talk." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Clara discovered that the saloon served meals throughout the day, and Levy's cooking had earned a reputation that brought in customers who might never otherwise set foot in such an establishment. He worked alongside her, showing her where everything was kept, demonstrating how he wanted vegetables chopped and bread sliced. By midday, when the first customers began arriving, Clara's arms ached from unaccustomed labor, but she felt more alive than she had in months. Levy worked with quiet efficiency, occasionally offering guidance but never criticism when she made mistakes. During a brief lull, he brought her a cup of coffee and gestured for her to sit. "You work hard," he observed, the simple statement carrying more weight than effusive praise might have. "It feels good to be useful again," Clara admitted, cradling the steaming cup between her palms. Levy studied her for a moment. "Martha says you were a teacher before," Clara nodded. "In a small town outside St. Louis. Nothing grand, just a one-room schoolhouse with children of all ages." "Our schoolteacher left last month," Levy said carefully. "Married a man from Sacramento. Children have been running wild since." Clara felt a spark of interest, quickly dampened by reality. "Even if the town would consider me, Hammond would never allow it. He's made it clear I won't find peace anywhere near Placerville." Levy's expression hardened. "Hammond doesn't run this town, though he'd like to think so." He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "There are people here, good people, who have had enough of his methods. The banker, Judge Wilson, several of the merchants. They're looking for ways to curb his influence." "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked, puzzled by his confidence in her. "Because you have something Hammond fears, knowledge of his business dealings with your husband. Information that might show he's not just collecting debts, but extorting money with false claims." Clara's mind raced. It was true that in the days after Thomas's death, before Hammond had started pursuing her, she'd gone through her husband's papers, trying to make sense of their financial situation. She'd found discrepancies that hadn't made sense, then records of loans that seemed to double overnight, interest rates that changed without explanation. "I'm not sure what I saw," she admitted, "but some of the figures didn't add up." Levy nodded, as though she'd confirmed something he already suspected. "That might be why he's so determined to run you out of town, or worse. It's not just about the money you supposedly owe. It's about what you might know." The realization sent a chill through Clara. "You think I'm in more danger than I realized." "I think," Levy said carefully, "that you have more value than you realize, not just because of what you know about Hammond, but because of who you are and what you can do." His hand moved as if to cover hers, then withdrew. "Placerville needs a teacher, Clara, and some of us are willing to stand against Hammond to get one." Before she could respond, the back door burst open and a young man rushed in, his face flushed with exertion. "Levy." "Hammond's men are at Martha's, tearing the place apart looking for that woman they are after," Clara gasped, rising to her feet. "Martha is fine," the young man assured her. "She sent me to warn you. She told them she hasn't seen hide nor hair of any woman matching their description." Levy's expression grew thunderous. "They have no right to search private property without the sheriff present." "Sheriff's out at the Peterson place," the young man reported. "Won't be back till tomorrow. They know it too." Levy turned to Clara, his decision already made. "You'll stay here tonight. I have rooms upstairs that aren't used. No one will think to look for you above a saloon." Fear and gratitude warred within her. "I can't put you at risk. You're not," Levy cut her off firmly. "This is my choice." To the young man, he added, "Tim, tell Martha that her guest is safe and to act like she has no idea where the woman went." After Tim departed, Levy led Clara up a narrow back staircase to the upper floor of the building. Unlike the public areas of the saloon below, the upstairs was surprisingly well maintained, with a small sitting area and several doors leading off a central hallway. "My quarters," Levy explained, gesturing to a door at the far end. "And these are rooms I keep for guests who shouldn't be sleeping it off downstairs." He opened the nearest door, revealing a simple but clean room with a bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the back alley. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it's secure. No one comes up here without my permission." Clara entered the room, touched by the unexpected haven. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked, turning to face him. "You don't know me. I could be exactly what Hammond claims a debtor trying to escape her obligations." Levy leaned against the doorframe, his eyes thoughtful. "I've been in Placerville for 15 years, he said. "Seen all kinds come through that saloon, got pretty good at judging character." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, Hammond called you a thief and a liar. Man's never told the truth a day in his life, so I figured you must be the opposite." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling back. "A solid basis for trust. I've built on shakier foundations," he replied, the smile reaching his eyes now. "Rest. I'll bring you something to eat later, after the evening rush." Left alone, Clara explored the small room, finding it surprisingly comfortable despite its Spartan furnishings. The window provided a limited view of Placerville, enough to see the main street and the distant hills beyond, painted gold in the afternoon sun. She could understand why people stayed, even after the easy gold was gone. There was a rugged beauty to the landscape, a sense of possibility that the East had long since tamed out of existence. True to his word, Levy returned several hours later with a tray laden with food, a hearty stew, fresh bread, and even a small apple pie that made Clara's mouth water. He set it on the small table by the window, then hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and conversation. "Join me," Clara offered, surprising herself with her boldness. "I hate to eat alone, and I'd like to hear more about Placerville." Something like relief flickered across his face as he pulled up the room's sole chair, gesturing for her to take the edge of the bed. As they ate, he told her about the town, how it had sprung up during the gold rush of '49, wild and lawless at first, then gradually settling into something resembling civilization. "I came in '54, he said, a distant look in his eyes. "Had notions of striking it rich like everyone else." "But you became a saloon keeper instead of a miner," Clara observed. A rueful smile crossed his face. "Figured out quick that the real money wasn't in digging gold, but in providing services to those who did. Started with a tent selling hot meals, eventually saved enough to buy the building downstairs." It's impressive, Clara said sincerely, building something lasting from nothing. What about you? Levy asked, his gray eyes intent on her face. How did a schoolteacher from Missouri end up married to a shopkeeper in California? The question stirred memories both sweet and painful. Thomas was passing through our town, setting up trade routes for his business. He stayed for 3 months, courting me with poetry and promises of adventure. She smiled faintly at the recollection. I was 22 and had never been more than 20 miles from home. The idea of California seemed like something from a storybook. And was it? What you imagined? Clara considered the question honestly. Parts of it. The landscape is more beautiful than I ever dreamed. But Thomas's business kept him traveling, and I spent most of my time alone in a small house in Sacramento, too far from neighbors for regular company. Sounds lonely, Levy observed quietly. It was, she admitted. Though I didn't let myself acknowledge that until after he died, it felt disloyal somehow. She set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. When he died, I discovered not only was the business failing, but he had borrowed heavily, including from Hammond. There was nothing left after the creditors took their share. Levy's expression darkened. Hammond's loans always seem to have a way of growing larger than the original sum. Folks have complained, but he has documents with signatures most folks can't prove they didn't agree to his terms. I found some of the paperwork, Clara said slowly. Thomas kept meticulous records even as things were falling apart. There were discrepancies, amounts that changed, interest rates that weren't in the original agreements. You still have these papers, she shook her head regretfully. Hammond's men raided the house the day after the funeral. They took everything, claiming it as partial payment. I only escaped with a few personal items. Her hand went instinctively to the small pouch hidden in her dress pocket, containing her mother's wedding ring. Levy considered this information, his expression thoughtful. Even without the papers, your testimony could be valuable if enough people come forward with similar stories. No court would take the word of a widow with no proof against a businessman with signed documents, Clara said bitterly. Perhaps not in Sacramento, Levy acknowledged, but here in Placerville, things work differently. Judge Wilson has had his own run-ins with Hammond. He'd be inclined to listen. Hope and fear warred within Clara. Even if that's true, I can't stay hidden forever. And I have nothing to build a new life with, no home, no possessions, no position. You have skills, Levy countered. And as I said, the town needs a teacher. A fugitive teacher. Who would entrust their children to someone being hunted by debt collectors? Levy's gaze was steady. People who know Hammond for what he is. People who have suffered under his practices themselves. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Give it a chance, Clara. That's all I'm asking. The echo of his words from the day before resonated through her. Give it a chance. Such a simple request, and yet it asked for more courage than she was sure she possessed. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words barely audible. Only a fool wouldn't be, Levy replied. But fear doesn't have to dictate your choices. Clara studied him in the fading light, this man who had become her unexpected champion. There was a steadiness to him that she found herself trusting despite every instinct for caution her recent experiences had taught her. All right, she said finally. I'll stay for now. But at the first sign that my presence is bringing trouble to you or Martha or anyone else, I'll leave. Levy's answering smile transformed his face, erasing years of weathering and worry. Fair enough, he agreed, extending his hand as if to seal their bargain. Clara took it, feeling the strength and warmth of his calloused palm against hers. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that their arrangement had evolved into something more than mere charity or temporary shelter. Neither of them acknowledged it aloud, but as Levy bid her good night and closed the door behind him, Clara knew that Placerville had already become more than just another stop in her flight from Hammond. Whether that was a blessing or a danger remained to be seen. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of rain pattering against the small window, a rare occurrence in the dry California summer. She rose and dressed in the same borrowed brown dress, splashing water on her face from the basin on the washstand. A soft knock announced Levy's presence. He entered with a tray containing coffee and toast, his expression serious. "Hammond's men are still in town," he reported. "They've been asking questions at every business on the main street." Clara's heart sank. "Have they come here yet?" "Not yet, but they will." He set the tray down and fixed her with a determined look. "I've been thinking about your situation. The immediate problem is keeping you safe from Hammond, but the longer-term issue is establishing you here in Placerville with a legitimate position. The teaching position you mentioned." Levy nodded. "I spoke with Judge Wilson this morning. He's also chairman of the town council that oversees the school. He's willing to meet with you discreetly to discuss the possibility." Hope fluttered in Clara's chest, quickly tempered by practicality. "Even if he agrees, how would I teach openly with Hammond's men looking for me?" A smile tugged at the corner of Levy's mouth. "That's where Martha's brilliance comes in. She suggested that if Clara Reed is being hunted, perhaps the town should hire someone else entirely." Understanding dawned on Clara. A different name, a respectable widow from San Francisco, perhaps, someone with teaching experience seeking a new start after losing her husband. Levy's eyes held a question. "Would you be willing to become someone else, at least until we can address the Hammond situation properly?" The idea was both frightening and liberating. To set aside Clara Reed, with all her failures and losses, and become someone new, someone unafraid, someone with purpose. "I think I would," she said slowly. "But wouldn't that be dishonest to the townspeople, to the children? The deception would only be in your history, not in who you truly are or your abilities to teach," Levy pointed out. "And it would be temporary just until we can challenge Hammond legally." Clara considered the proposal, weighing her limited options. "If Judge Wilson agrees to this plan, then yes, I'll do it." Relief visibly washed over Levy. "Good. He's coming here at noon, when the rain has people seeking shelter indoors, and there are enough customers that one more visitor won't be noticed." The hours until midday passed slowly. Clara remained in the upstairs room, alternating between watching the rain-slicked street below and pacing the small space. She tried to organize her thoughts about teaching what she would need, how she would structure lessons for children of different ages, but her mind kept returning to the enormity of what she was considering. Not just a new job, but a new identity. At precisely noon, a soft knock announced Levy's return. With him was a distinguished older man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in the sober black suit of his judicial office. "Judge Wilson," Levy introduced. "This is Clara Reed." The judge studied her with keen blue eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Reed," he greeted her, his voice cultured but not unkind. "Levy has told me something of your situation." "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Your Honor," Clara replied, gesturing for him to take the room's only chair while she perched on the edge of the bed. "Jasper Hammond has been a thorn in this town's side for too long," the judge said without preamble. "Several of our citizens have suffered from his predatory lending practices, but few have been willing to speak against him publicly." "I understand their reluctance," Clara said. "He's a powerful man." "Power built on fear has a weak foundation," Judge Wilson observed. "But I didn't come here to philosophize." He leaned forward, fixing Clara with an evaluative gaze. Levy tells me you were a teacher before your marriage. Tell me about your education and experience. For the next half hour, Clara answered the judge's increasingly specific questions about teaching methods, curriculum, and classroom management. She found herself relaxing as the conversation continued, the familiar subject matter allowing her natural knowledge and enthusiasm to show. Finally, Judge Wilson sat back, a small smile playing at his lips. "Well, Mrs. Reed, I believe you would be an excellent teacher for our children. The question now is how to make that possible while addressing your legal complications." Levy mentioned the possibility of a new identity, Clara said hesitantly. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that seems the most expedient solution for now. We could present you as—" He paused, considering Mrs. Catherine Lewis, perhaps, a widow from San Francisco seeking a quieter life. "Catherine," Clara repeated, trying the name on for size. It was her middle name, which would make it easier to remember. "And Lewis was my mother's maiden name. I could answer to that naturally enough." "Excellent," the judge approved. "As for your documentation, I can provide a letter of appointment from the town council that should satisfy any initial inquiries. For more substantial proof, I have contacts in San Francisco who can establish a paper trail if necessary." Clara was momentarily taken aback by how easily the respected jurist offered to create false records, but she reminded herself that frontier justice often operated by different rules than its eastern counterpart. "The school has been closed for nearly a month," Judge Wilson continued. "The children are getting restless and parents are complaining. How soon could you begin?" The suddenness of the question startled her. I would need some time to prepare lessons, to familiarize myself with what the previous teacher was covering. 2 days, Levy interjected. "Martha has already found appropriate clothing for a schoolteacher, and I can escort Mrs. Lewis to the schoolhouse tomorrow to assess what supplies are needed." Judge Wilson nodded approvingly. "Then we'll announce the arrival of our new teacher tomorrow, and classes can resume the following day." He rose, extending his hand to Clara. "Welcome to Placerville, Mrs. Lewis. I believe you'll find our community supportive of education and of those who stand against injustice." After the judge departed, Clara turned to Levy, overwhelmed by the speed of developments. "This is happening so quickly. What if I'm not ready? What if someone recognizes me?" "Few in town have seen Clara read clearly," Levy reminded her. "Hammond's men have a description, but Catherine Lewis will look quite different, especially dressed as a respectable schoolteacher rather than a woman on the run. And my lodgings. I can hardly continue living above a saloon if I'm to be a respectable widow. Martha has a proper room for you at the boarding house, one at the front, befitting your new status. Hammond's men have already searched there and found nothing, so they're unlikely to return." Clara sank onto the bed, the reality of her situation finally hitting home. "I'm actually doing this, becoming someone else." Levy sat beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Just the name is different. The person, the teacher, the woman who cares about doing what's right, that's still you." His confidence steadied her, as it had since the moment he'd first hidden her from Hammond's men. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "I'm just returning the favor," Levy replied, his voice equally soft. "Someone did the same for me once when I needed it most." The simple statement hinted at depths to his past that Clara found herself wanting to explore, but before she could ask, he rose briskly. "You should rest this afternoon," he advised. "Tomorrow will be busy, establishing Mrs. Lewis in town." After Levy left, Clara lay back on the bed, listening to the rain and contemplating the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just 2 days. From a desperate fugitive to the town's new schoolteacher, it seemed impossible. And yet it was happening. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, a classroom filled with eager children, a place in the community, perhaps even friends. The image was so compelling that she barely noticed when her eyes drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming her. The transformation of Clara Reed into Catherine Lewis began early the next morning. Martha arrived with an armload of clothing suitable for a respectable schoolteacher, modest dresses in subdued colors, a proper bonnet, and even a pair of barely worn leather boots that fit Clara surprisingly well. "These belong to my niece," Martha explained as Clara admired the boots. "She moved to Oregon last year and couldn't take everything, said I should find them a good home." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "Teach our children well," Martha replied simply. "That'll be payment enough." Once dressed in her new attire, a slate blue dress with a high collar and small pearl buttons, Clara hardly recognized herself in the small mirror above the washstand. With her hair neatly arranged and her posture straight, she looked every inch the respectable widow and educator. Levy's reaction when she descended the back stairs confirmed the transformation. He stared for a moment, something flickering in his gray eyes that Clara couldn't quite identify, before clearing his throat. "Mrs. Lewis, I presume," he said, offering his arm with formal courtesy that didn't quite mask the warmth in his voice. "Indeed, Mr. Crawford," she replied, slipping into the role with surprising ease. "I understand you've kindly offered to show me to the schoolhouse." They maintained the pretense as they walked through town, Levy pointing out landmarks as though to a newcomer, while discreetly noting which buildings housed Hammond's allies, and which were owned by those who might be sympathetic to Clara's situation. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a small bell tower and a dusty yard for the children's recreation. Inside, Clara found a space that was functional but neglected, desks arranged in neat rows, a larger desk at the front for the teacher, and a blackboard that needed cleaning. "It's not much," Levy apologized, watching her reaction carefully. "It's perfect," Clara breathed, already envisioning how she would arrange things, where she would post maps and arithmetic tables, how she would organize the small collection of books on the shelf behind the desk. She spent the next hour examining every aspect of the schoolroom, making mental notes of what needed attention before classes could begin. Levy watched her with growing amusement as she muttered to herself, opening drawers and testing chalk on the blackboard. "You're in your element," he observed as she discovered a cabinet filled with paper, pencils, and other supplies. Clara looked up, suddenly self-conscious. "I suppose I am. It's been so long since I felt useful." "The town is fortunate to have you," Levy said, and there was no mistaking the sincerity in his voice. Their eyes met across the dusty schoolroom, and for a moment, Clara felt a connection that went beyond their practical arrangement. There was something in Levy's steady gaze that made her heart beat faster, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The moment was broken by voices outside, children, from the sound of it, curious about activity at the long-closed schoolhouse. Levy moved to the window, then smiled. "I believe your future pupils are eager to meet you," he said, gesturing for Clara to join him. 3 children stood in the schoolyard, 2 boys and a girl, all around 10 years old, watching the schoolhouse with undisguised curiosity. When the door opened, they took a collective step back, but their interest overcame their caution. "Are you the new teacher?" the girl asked boldly, her freckled face tilted up to study Clara. Clara smiled, kneeling slightly to meet the child at eye level. "I am. My name is Mrs. Lewis." "And who might you be?" "I'm Sarah Wilson," the girl announced. "The judge is my grandpa, And these are the Miller twins, Ethan and Evan. Pleased to meet you all, Clara said warmly. Classes will begin tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Will you help spread the word to the other children? The three nodded eagerly, clearly delighted to be given an important task. They raced off, shouting the news to anyone who would listen that the new teacher had arrived, and school would resume tomorrow. Well, Levy chuckled, watching them go, I'd say your arrival is now officially public knowledge. Clara laughed, the sound surprising her with its ease. Nothing spreads news faster than eager children. They spent another hour at the schoolhouse, Levy helping Clara clean the blackboard and arrange the desks while she outlined what additional supplies she would need. It was comfortable. Working alongside him, he anticipated her needs without being asked, offering suggestions without trying to take control. By the time they finished, the schoolroom looked welcoming and organized, ready for students the next day. Clara stood in the doorway, looking back at her handiwork with satisfaction. Thank you for your help, she said sincerely. I couldn't have managed all this alone. You would have found a way, Levy replied with that same quiet confidence that never failed to strengthen her own. But I'm glad I could be of service. They walked back toward town, Clara now officially installed in Martha's front guest room, which had been hastily prepared for her arrival. As they passed the general store, Clara noticed several men lounging outside, their posture suggesting they were waiting rather than simply passing time. Hammond's men, she murmured, resisting the urge to lower her head or change direction. Levy nodded slightly, his body tensing beside hers. Just keep walking naturally. You're Catherine Lewis now, and they're looking for Clara Reed. Clara forced herself to maintain an even pace, even managing a polite nod to the men as they passed. One of them straightened, studying her with narrowed eyes, but after a moment, he returned to his conversation with his companions. Only when they had turned the corner did Clara release the breath she'd been holding. That was closer than I'd like, she admitted. But you handled it perfectly, Levy assured her. Guilty people avoid eye contact. You looked right at them with the confidence of someone with nothing to hide. They reached Martha's boarding house, where the older woman was waiting on the porch. Just in time for dinner, she announced. And you've got another visitor waiting in the parlor. Clara tensed, but Martha's calm demeanor suggested it wasn't an unwelcome caller. Indeed, when they entered the parlor, they found Judge Wilson seated by the fire, a portfolio of papers on his lap. Ah, Mrs. Lewis, he greeted Clara formally, mindful of potential listeners. I've brought your letter of appointment and some additional documentation that might prove useful. He handed her the portfolio with a significant look. I suggest you familiarize yourself with your background thoroughly. Inside, Clara found not only the official letter naming her as Placerville's new teacher, but also a carefully crafted history. Catherine Lewis, born in Boston, educated at a respectable women's seminary, widowed when her husband Michael died of influenza 2 years earlier. There were even letters of reference from fictional employers in San Francisco, written on authentic letterhead and signed with real names. These people, Clara began, amazed at the thoroughness of the deception. Are friends who understand the importance of standing against Hammond's type of injustice, the judge explained. Should anyone write to verify your references, they will receive confirmation of Mrs. Lewis's excellent character and qualifications. The extent of the preparation stunned Clara. You've gone to extraordinary lengths for someone you barely know. Perhaps, Judge Wilson acknowledged, or perhaps we're merely investing in Placerville's future. A good teacher is hard to find in these parts, Mrs. Lewis. His eyes twinkled with surprising mischief for such a dignified man. Besides, Anything that frustrates Jasper Hammond serves the cause of justice, in my opinion. After reviewing the documents together and sharing a simple but hearty dinner, the judge took his leave. Levy lingered, clearly reluctant to depart despite the propriety that suggested he should. "Will you be all right?" he asked softly as they stood in Martha's small front hallway. "Tomorrow is an important day," Clara smiled, touched by his concern. "I'll be fine. Teaching is the one thing I know I can do well." "I have no doubt of that," Levy replied. He hesitated, then added, "I'll try to stop by after school lets out to see how your first day went." "I'd like that," Clara admitted, surprising herself with her candor. A pleased expression crossed Levy's face before he donned his hat and stepped into the evening air. Clara watched him go, aware of Martha's knowing gaze on her back, but unwilling to examine too closely the warmth that had settled in her chest. That night, Clara carefully reviewed the documents Judge Wilson had provided, committing to memory the details of Catherine Lewis's life. It was strange, preparing to teach children while simultaneously learning to be someone else, but she was determined to succeed at both tasks. As she finally drifted to sleep, her last thoughts were not of the challenges ahead, but of Levy's steady presence beside her as they'd walked through town, and of the way his eyes had lit when she'd laughed in the schoolhouse, as though her happiness was something precious to be treasured. The first day of school dawned clear and bright, the summer heat tempered by a gentle breeze that stirred the curtains in Clara's room. She dressed carefully in her best new outfit, a forest green dress with a crisp white collar, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style that suited Catherine Lewis's dignified persona. Martha provided a hearty breakfast and a packed lunch, along with a small bell. "The old one at the school broke months ago," she explained. "This was my mother's dinner bell, but it'll serve to call the children in from play." The walk to the schoolhouse gave Clara time to settle her nerves, reciting in her mind the lessons she'd planned for various age groups. She decided to begin with assessments to determine each child's level, followed by a collaborative project that would help establish a sense of community among pupils who'd been without guidance for weeks. She arrived early, taking time to write a welcome message on the blackboard and arrange her desk before the first students began to appear. They came in 2s and 3s at first, then in larger groups as 8 o'clock approached children of all ages from 6 to 16, some neatly dressed and clearly from prosperous families, others in patched clothing that spoke of harder circumstances. By 5 minutes past 8, 27 students had filled the schoolroom, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism as they assessed their new teacher. Clara recognized Sarah Wilson and the Miller twins from the day before, their faces friendly among the sea of strangers. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice clear and confident despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I am Mrs. Lewis, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher." A chorus of "Good morning, Mrs. Lewis" echoed back, some voices enthusiastic, others merely dutiful. Clara smiled, remembering how her own teacher had begun each day with a quote or thought to consider. "There is an old saying," she continued, "today is the first day of the rest of your life." I believe that's especially true in a schoolroom, where each day brings new knowledge and new opportunities to grow. She moved to the center of the room, making eye contact with as many students as possible. "Since this is our first day together, we'll begin by learning about each other." The morning passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and carefully structured activities, designed to help Clara understand the strengths and weaknesses of each child while establishing her authority through firm but kind leadership. By the time the lunch hour arrived, she had learned all 27 names, identified which children would need extra support with reading, which excelled at mathematics, and which were natural leaders among their peers. As the children scattered to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Clara sank into her chair, both exhilarated and exhausted. Teaching again felt right in a way nothing had since Thomas's death, perhaps even before that. Here, she had purpose, skills to contribute, a role that suited her natural abilities. The afternoon continued the morning's success. Clara divided the students into groups based on their abilities rather than strictly by age, assigning appropriate work to each while moving between them to offer guidance. By the time the final hour approached, she had established a routine that seemed to satisfy both the youngest pupils and the older ones, who would soon be leaving school for adult responsibilities. "For our last task today," she announced as the shadows lengthened outside the windows, "I'd like each of you to write one thing you hope to learn this year. It can be academic, like improving your arithmetic or reading, or something more personal." She smiled encouragingly. "This is just for me to read, to help me plan our lessons." The sound of pencils on paper filled the room as the children bent to their task. Clara watched them, a sense of rightness settling over her. This was what she was meant to do, not just teach facts and figures, but help shape young minds, encourage curiosity, foster growth. When the last bell rang at 4 o'clock, there were groans of disappointment from several students, the highest compliment a teacher could receive. Clara stood at the door as they filed out, offering a personal word to each child, noting which one seemed to crave extra attention and which hurried away to other responsibilities. As the last student disappeared down the dusty road, Clara turned back to the empty schoolroom, surveying the evidence of a day well spent, assignments stacked neatly on her desk, the blackboard filled with the day's lessons, books returned to their proper places by careful hands. "Looks like a successful first day," a familiar voice observed from the doorway. Clara turned to find Levy leaning against the frame, his expression warm with approval. "Were you watching?" she asked, surprised she hadn't noticed his arrival. "Just the end," he admitted. "Didn't want to disrupt your authority by having strange men lurking about during school hours." Clara laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "Very considerate of you. And yes, I think it was a good first day. The children are bright and mostly eager to learn." "Mostly?" Levy raised an eyebrow, coming fully into the room. "Well, there are always a few who need extra motivation," Clara acknowledged, thinking of 14-year-old James Barrett, who'd made it clear he thought school was a waste of time compared to working at his father's smithy. "But we'll get there." Levy moved to help her gather the children's papers. "The town's been buzzing about you all day," he reported. "Mrs. Lewis from San Francisco, so well-spoken and educated. The widow Peterson is already planning to invite you to tea, and Mrs. Anderson wants to know if you might consider teaching piano lessons after school hours." Clara groaned good-naturedly. "I've been Mrs. Lewis for exactly 1 day, and already my social calendar threatens to overwhelm me." "Such are the perils of being the most interesting new arrival in Placerville since the last gold strike," Levy teased. Then, more seriously, "It's good, though. The more embedded you become in the community, the harder it will be for Hammond to cause trouble, even if he does eventually connect you to Clara Raid." The mention of Hammond sobered Clara's mood. In the excitement of her first day teaching, she'd almost forgotten the danger that still lurked at the edges of her new life. "Have his men been asking more questions?" Levy nodded grimly. "They were at the saloon at midday, describing you to anyone who would listen and offering a reward for information. But they're looking for a desperate woman in a blue dress, not a confident schoolteacher in green." Clara shivered despite the warmth of the late afternoon. He's very determined, which makes me more convinced than ever that this is about more than just a debt, Levy said, his expression thoughtful. There's something in those papers of your husband's that Hammond doesn't want known. If only I could remember more clearly what I saw, Clara said, frustration evident in her voice. There were figures that didn't match, dates that changed. But in the confusion after Thomas's death, I didn't understand the significance. It might come back to you over time, Levy suggested. Now that you're not constantly running, your mind has space to process what you saw. They finished organizing the classroom in companionable silence, Levy helping Clara prepare materials for the next day's lessons. As they walked back toward town together in the golden light of late afternoon, Clara felt a contentment she had almost forgotten was possible. "Thank you," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Levy glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "For what?" "For believing I could be more than a fugitive. For seeing a teacher when I could only see a hunted woman." Clara's voice softened. "For giving me a chance when I said I had nothing to give." Levy's step faltered slightly, his gaze intensifying as it met hers. "You always had something to give, Clara. You just needed to remember it." The use of her real name, spoken softly so only she could hear, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. In that moment, Clara realized that her feelings for Levy had grown beyond gratitude or even friendship. There was an attraction, a connection that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. Before she could examine the realization more closely, voices ahead broke the spell. A group of women was approaching the town's social leaders, from the look of their fine dresses and elaborate hats. "Mrs. Lewis," called the foremost, a plump, pleasant-faced woman Clara recognized as the banker's wife. "We were just on our way to call on you at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house." Clara smoothly shifted back into her role as Catherine Lewis, accepting introductions and invitations with gracious dignity, while Levy stood respectfully aside. By the time the women continued on their way, having extracted promises from Clara to attend various social functions in the coming weeks, the intimate moment had passed. "I should get back to the saloon," Levy said, his manner slightly more formal than before, as though he too had sensed the shift between them and wasn't yet sure how to navigate it. "Will you be all right with Martha?" Clara nodded, oddly disappointed yet also relieved by his withdrawal. "Of course, and I have lessons to plan for tomorrow." Levy tipped his hat, a gesture that managed to be both courtly and slightly teasing. "Then I'll bid you good evening, Mrs. Lewis. Placerville is fortunate to have found such a dedicated teacher." As he walked away, Clara felt the curious gaze of several townspeople who had witnessed their exchange. She realized with a start that her connection to Levy would be subject to the scrutiny of small-town eyes, and that the respectable Mrs. Lewis would need to be careful about appearing too familiar with the saloon keeper, regardless of how instrumental he had been in her arrival. The realization brought a pang of sadness. In becoming Catherine Lewis, she had gained safety and purpose, but perhaps at the cost of the freedom to follow her growing feelings for the man who had made it all possible. The next weeks fell into a pattern that gradually began to feel like a real life rather than a temporary disguise. Each morning, Clara, or Catherine, as she was now known to everyone in town, taught her growing class of students, discovering a joy in the work that surpassed even her memories of teaching in Missouri. The children responded to her genuine interest in their progress, and even reluctant learners like James Barrett began to show improvement under her guidance. Afternoons often included social calls, taking tea with the Ladies' Aid Society, discussing books with the small but dedicated literary circle, or giving piano lessons to those few children whose parents could afford the extra instruction. Clara found herself embraced by Placerville's society with a warmth that both touched and occasionally overwhelmed her. Evenings were quieter, spent in Martha's comfortable parlor preparing lessons, or sometimes simply enjoying the luxury of reading for pleasure, a habit she had abandoned during her months on the run. Martha proved to be not just a landlady but a friend, her practical wisdom and dry humor a balm to Clara's spirits when the strain of maintaining her new identity became wearing through it all. Levy remained a steady presence at the edges of her life, never intrusive, always supportive. He would appear at the schoolhouse occasionally to help with repairs or deliver books he'd ordered for her students from Sacramento. Sometimes he would walk with her after church on Sundays, their conversations ranging from town gossip to deeper discussions of books they had both read. Yet there was a carefulness to their interactions now, a deliberate maintenance of proper distance that Clara both understood and regretted. Catherine Lewis, respectable widow and teacher, could not be seen to form too close an attachment to Levy Crawford, saloon keeper. No matter how well regarded he might be in business matters, Hammond's men remained in town, their presence a constant reminder of the precariousness of Clara's new life. They had expanded their inquiries, now showing a rough sketch of Clara that captured her general features if not the confidence and poise that Catherine Lewis projected. Still, Clara found herself taking circuitous routes to avoid them and ducking into shops when they appeared on the street ahead of her. It was after one such near encounter, when Clara had slipped into the back of Levy's saloon to avoid Hammond's lead man on the main street, that things began to change. Levy had ushered her upstairs to the room she'd first occupied, concern etched on his features. "They're getting closer," he observed grimly, closing the door behind them. "That sketch is too accurate for comfort." Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted by the constant vigilance. "I can't keep doing this, Levy. Living two lives, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if today is the day someone will recognize me." Levy leaned against the wall, his expression troubled. "We need to deal with Hammond directly once and for all." "How?" Clara asked, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "He has all the power, all the documentation, without proof that he falsified the debt." "There might be another way," Levy interrupted, his voice taking on a determined edge. "Judge Wilson and I have been discussing options. Hammond has made enemies throughout the county, not just in Placerville. If enough people were willing to come forward with similar experiences." "A pattern of fraud," Clara said slowly, understanding dawning. "Multiple witnesses making the same claim would be harder to dismiss." "Exactly." Levy pushed away from the wall, pacing the small room as he outlined the plan. "The judge has been quietly gathering statements from people who believe Hammond altered their loan terms. Individually, none would stand against Hammond's documentation, but together, they create a compelling case," Clara finished, hope flickering to life within her. "But would people really risk Hammond's retaliation by coming forward? They might, with the right motivation." Levy stopped pacing, turning to face her with an intensity that caught her breath. "You're not the only one he's driven from their home, Clara. There are others who have lost everything to his schemes, if they believed there was a real chance of justice." "What do you need from me?" Clara asked, her decision already made. "Your testimony would be crucial," Levy admitted. "As the widow of Thomas Reed, your account of finding discrepancies in his papers would help establish Hammond's pattern." Fear and determination warred within Clara. "If I testify, I reveal that Catherine Lewis is a fiction. I could lose everything I've built here." "Or you could be free to be yourself again," Levy countered softly. No more looking over your shoulder, no more pretending to be someone you're not. The possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. To be Clara Reed again, not the frightened widow fleeing creditors, but a woman who had faced injustice and helped bring a predator to account. When? She asked simply. 2 weeks, Levy replied. The circuit judge arrives then. Judge Wilson believes he'll be sympathetic to our case. He's had his own run-ins with Hammond in other counties. Clara nodded slowly, her mind already calculating the risks and potential outcomes. I'll do it, she said finally, but I want to keep teaching, regardless of what happens. The children shouldn't suffer because of my situation. Relief and something warmer flooded Levy's expression. I don't think there's a force in Placerville that could separate you from that schoolroom, he said, his voice gentle with understanding. Not when they've seen what you've accomplished in just a few weeks. Clara rose, smoothing her skirts in a gesture that had become habitual in her role as Catherine Lewis. Then we have 2 weeks to prepare. I should review everything I can remember about Thomas's papers, try to recall as many details as possible. Levy moved toward the door, then hesitated, turning back to her with an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his manner. Clara, he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. Yes. She prompted, aware of a sudden tension between them that had nothing to do with Hammond or the upcoming testimony. When this is over, Levy said carefully, when you don't need to be Catherine Lewis anymore, I hope you'll stay in Placerville. As yourself. The simple statement carried a weight of meaning that Clara couldn't pretend to misunderstand. This wasn't just about her position as teacher or her place in the community. This was about the connection that had been growing between them since the day he'd hidden her from Hammond's men. A connection they had both carefully avoided acknowledging as long as she lived behind the mask of Catherine Lewis. I'd like that, she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering of her heart. Very much. A smile broke across Levy's face, transforming his rugged features with a joy that took Clara's breath away. For a moment, she thought he might step toward her, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained. Instead, he inclined his head in a gesture of respect that somehow felt more intimate than a touch. Then we have even more reason to succeed, he said simply, and was gone, leaving Clara to contemplate a future that suddenly held possibilities she had not dared to imagine. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. By day, Clara continued her duties as Catherine Lewis, teaching her students with undiminished enthusiasm while fielding invitations and social obligations that had only increased as her popularity in town grew. By night, she met secretly with Judge Wilson, Levy, and a growing number of Hammond's victims who had agreed to testify. Each evening revealed new aspects of Hammond's operations, how he targeted vulnerable business owners, altered loan terms after agreements were signed, and used threats and intimidation to silence those who questioned his methods. Clara's memories of Thomas's papers became clearer as she discussed them, details emerging from the fog of grief and fear that had clouded her initial examination. She recalled specific amounts that had changed between agreements, interest rates that had mysteriously doubled, and payment records that Hammond's men had seized along with everything else from her Sacramento home. He keeps everything, one former shopkeeper explained during a particularly illuminating session. Original documents, altered ones, payment records all locked in that safe in his office. He's too arrogant to destroy evidence of his methods because he believes no one will ever challenge him successfully. That safe could be the key to everything, Judge Wilson mused. With the original documents, we could prove the alterations beyond any doubt. The idea germinated over several days, growing from a wishful thought into a daring plan. Hammond maintained an office in Placerville, though he spent most of his time in Sacramento. The safe was there, according to multiple sources, containing evidence that could free not just Clara but dozens of others from Hammond's predatory grip. "It's too risky," Clara protested when Levy first suggested they might be able to access the safe. "Breaking into his office. That would make us criminals, regardless of our intentions." "Not breaking in," Levy clarified. "Hammond's clerk, Simmons, has been showing signs of discontent. Judge Wilson believes he might be persuaded to cooperate, especially if offered immunity for his role in Hammond's schemes." The plan took shape gradually. Approach Simmons carefully. Offer him protection in exchange for access to the safe. Document its contents without removing anything. Then present the evidence to the circuit judge alongside the testimony they had already gathered. It was daring, legally questionable, and possibly their only chance at justice. After much debate, Clara agreed that it was worth attempting, though she insisted on being present when they examined the safe's contents. "Those papers ruined my life," she said firmly when Levy tried to exclude her from this most dangerous part of the plan. "I need to see them to understand exactly how Hammond manipulated Thomas's debts." The night before the circuit judge was due to arrive, their plan was set in motion. Judge Wilson had successfully approached Simmons, who proved even more eager to turn on his employer than they had hoped. Years of witnessing Hammond's methods had left the clerk with a conscience heavy with guilt and a fear for his own future if Hammond's schemes ever came to light. "He's been getting worse," Simmons confided when they met in Judge Wilson's study. "More reckless, taking bigger risks. It's only a matter of time before someone with real power notices and investigates. I don't want to be caught in that storm." With Simmons's cooperation, they arranged to enter Hammond's office after dark, when the business district was quiet. Clara insisted on maintaining her Catherine Lewis persona until the very last moment, teaching a full day at the school and attending a ladies' aid meeting in the afternoon, before slipping away to join Levy and Judge Wilson at the appointed hour. The office was a modest building on a side street, its unassuming exterior belying the impact its owner had on so many lives. Simmons met them at the back door, his thin face pinched with nervousness as he ushered them inside and locked the door behind them. "The safe is in his private office," the clerk whispered, leading them down a narrow hallway. "I don't know the combination, but I've seen him open it enough times to have a good idea of the sequence." The private office was exactly as Clara had imagined it, opulent in a way that spoke of wealth built on others' misfortunes. Hammond's desk dominated the room, while behind it stood the safe, a massive iron box with a gleaming dial that caught the light of their lantern. Simmons approached it with the caution of someone handling a dangerous animal. "It usually takes him 3 or 4 attempts," he admitted as he began to turn the dial. "I've never tried it myself." The minutes stretched as the clerk made several unsuccessful attempts, each failure increasing the tension in the room. Clara found herself holding her breath, aware that every moment they remained increased their risk of discovery. Finally, on the 5th attempt, there was a satisfying click. Simmons stepped back, gesturing for Judge Wilson to do the honors of opening the heavy door. Inside, the safe was meticulously organized shelves of ledgers labeled by year, folders of documents sorted by name, and at the back, a small cash box that presumably contained emergency funds. Judge Wilson immediately began examining the ledgers while Levy carefully removed folders labeled with names they recognized from their witness list. "Here," Clara said suddenly, spotting a folder marked Reed T. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew it, opening the cover to reveal a stack of documents, loan agreements, payment records, and correspondence between Hammond and Thomas that she had never seen before. As she began to read, the full extent of Hammond's deception became clear. The original loan agreement showed an interest rate of 8%, but subsequent documents still bearing what appeared to be Thomas's signature showed rates of 15%, then 22%. Payment records had been altered, with sums recorded as lower than what Thomas had actually paid, ensuring the debt grew rather than diminished. Most damning of all was a letter from Thomas dated just days before his death, formally disputing the amounts Hammond claimed were owed and demanding an accounting of all payments made. It was a letter Clara had never seen, one that Hammond had intercepted and hidden, knowing it threatened his entire operation. He knew, Clara whispered, a mixture of grief and vindication washing over her. Thomas realized what was happening before he died. Levy moved to her side, his presence steady and comforting as he examined the documents with her. "This is more than enough to prove fraud," he confirmed. "Combined with the other evidence we're finding, Hammond doesn't stand a chance." They worked methodically for the next hour, carefully documenting the contents of the safe without removing anything that might alert Hammond to their investigation. Judge Wilson made detailed notes, while Simmons identified additional files that contained evidence of altered documents. By the time they finished, they had compiled overwhelming proof of Hammond's systematic fraud, not just against Clara, but against dozens of businesses and individuals across 3 counties. The pattern was always the same: initial fair terms followed by gradual alterations, missing payment records, and ultimately, seizure of property valued far beyond the original debt. "This is enough to ruin him," Judge Wilson said with grim satisfaction as they carefully returned the documents to their places and closed the safe. "The circuit judge will have no choice but to order a full investigation once he sees what we've gathered." As they prepared to leave, Clara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the burden of injustice she had carried since Thomas's death finally beginning to ease. They had done it. They had found the evidence needed to stop Hammond and clear her name. The feeling of triumph lasted exactly 3 minutes, the time it took them to reach the back door and discover it blocked by the unmistakable bulk of Jasper Hammond himself, flanked by 2 of his men. "Well," Hammond drawled, his fleshy face twisted in a mockery of surprise, "what have we here?" "A midnight meeting in my office. How interesting." Clara's blood froze as Hammond's gaze fixed on her, recognition dawning in his cold eyes. "Ah, the widow Reid, I've been looking for you." His smile widened unpleasantly. "Or should I say, Mrs. Lewis, you've been quite convincing in your new role." Levy moved slightly, positioning himself between Clara and Hammond. "This is over, Hammond," he said, his voice level despite the tension Clara could feel radiating from him. "We have evidence of your fraud, documented proof that you altered loan agreements and payment records." Hammond's laugh held no humor. "Evidence obtained by breaking into my private office. I don't think that will hold up well in court," he gestured to his men, "especially not when I have witnesses to your crime." "We didn't break in," Judge Wilson interjected, his judicial authority evident in his tone. "Mr. Simmons provided us with legitimate access as an employee concerned about illegal activities." Hammond's gaze shifted to the clerk, who shrank back against the wall. "Simmons," he spat. "I should have known you lacked the spine for this business." He turned his attention back to Judge Wilson. "It hardly matters. Your word against mine, Judge, and in case you've forgotten, I have friends in the territorial government who might be interested to hear about your involvement in this." Unusual investigation method. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Hammond believed his connections would protect him, even against the evidence they had gathered. "You're wrong," Clara said, finding her voice at last. "It's not just the judge's word. It's mine and Levy's and Mr. Simmons's and the words of every person you've defrauded over the years." She stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated any longer. "People who have agreed to testify about your methods, Hammond. People who have nothing left to lose because you've already taken everything from them." Something flickered in Hammond's expression, the first hint of uncertainty. "Empty threats," he dismissed, but there was less conviction in his tone. "Not empty at all," Judge Wilson said calmly. "The circuit judge arrives tomorrow, and he'll find 27 sworn statements waiting for him, along with our detailed documentation of your safe's contents." He smiled thinly. "You can destroy the evidence now if you wish, but that would only strengthen our case that you have something to hide." Hammond's face reddened with anger as he realized the trap closing around him. If he had them arrested, their allegations would become public record. If he attempted to destroy the evidence in his safe, he would only confirm their claims. And if he did nothing, the circuit judge would receive testimony too compelling to ignore. "What do you want?" he demanded finally, his voice rough with suppressed rage. "Justice," Clara replied simply. "Return what you've stolen, not just from me, but from everyone you've defrauded. Face the consequences of your actions." "Or," Hammond challenged, not yet ready to concede defeat. "Or face criminal charges," Judge Wilson said firmly. "Fraud, extortion, theft, the list is quite extensive based on what we've documented tonight." A tense silence followed as Hammond visibly calculated his options. His men shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain whether to intervene without explicit orders. "I could still make things very difficult for all of you," Hammond said finally, his threat directed primarily at Clara. "Your deception as Mrs. Lewis. For instance, how would your precious schoolchildren's parents feel about that?" Levy stepped forward, his patience clearly at an end. "Enough, Hammond. You've lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you can muster, or don't, but this ends tonight one way or another." Perhaps it was the absolute certainty in Levy's voice, or the united front presented by the four people facing him, but something finally penetrated Hammond's arrogance. His shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the first physical admission of defeat. "I want immunity," he said abruptly. "In writing, from the circuit judge. In exchange, I'll make restitution to those with legitimate claims." Judge Wilson considered the offer with judicial impartiality. "I cannot promise what the circuit judge will decide," he said carefully. "But I will present your cooperation as a mitigating factor if you provide full disclosure and restitution." It was not the complete victory they had hoped for, but it was more than Clara had dared to expect when she'd fled Sacramento months earlier. Hammond would face consequences, perhaps not as severe as he deserved, but significant nonetheless. And she would be free from hiding, free from fear, free to build a life as herself again. The negotiation continued for another hour, with Hammond gradually accepting the inevitability of his situation. By the time they finally left the office, a tentative agreement had been reached. Hammond would provide full financial records to the circuit judge, make restitution to those he had defrauded, and in exchange would likely avoid imprisonment, though not financial penalties. Dawn was breaking as Clara, Levy, and Judge Wilson walked back through the quiet streets of Placerville. Simmons had remained behind to secure the office, while Hammond had departed with his men, the fight gone out of him at least temporarily. "It's really over," Clara marveled as they reached Martha's boarding house. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Levy said, his smile tired but genuine. "By this time tomorrow, Catherine Lewis can retire and Clara Reed can return to teaching without looking over her shoulder." Judge Wilson excused himself to prepare for the circuit judge's arrival, leaving Clara and Levy alone in the soft light of early morning. "What happens now?" Clara asked softly, the question encompassing far more than just the practical aftermath of their confrontation with Hammond. Levy's gaze held hers, all the careful distance of the past weeks finally falling away. "Now," he said, his voice gentle yet certain, "we begin again. Not as Catherine Lewis and the man who helped her, but as Clara Reed and Levy Crawford. Two people who might have a future together, if that's what they choose." Clara felt the last of her fear dissolve, replaced by a warmth that spread through her entire being. "I think I would like that very much," she whispered. Levy's smile deepened as he took her hand, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern across her knuckles. "I told you that first day," he reminded her, "when you said you had nothing to give. All I asked was for a chance." "You were right," Clara acknowledged, returning his smile with one of her own. "Though I never expected to find so much when I thought I had lost everything." They stood there in the quiet morning light, hands clasped, the promise of a new beginning stretching before them like the golden rays of the rising sun. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that while the path ahead might not always be easy, it would be one they would walk together, and that made all the difference. The circuit judge's arrival that afternoon set in motion the formal proceedings that would ultimately lead to Hammond's downfall. True to their agreement, Hammond provided his financial records and began the process of making restitution, though not without attempting to minimize his liability at every turn. The judge, a stern-faced man with a reputation for fairness, was clearly appalled by the evidence presented. After reviewing the sworn statements and examining the detailed notes from their examination of Hammond's safe, he ordered a complete audit of Hammond's business dealings across the territory. For Clara, the most significant outcome was the official acknowledgement that Thomas's debt had been fraudulently inflated. The judge ordered Hammond to provide a formal letter clearing Thomas Reed's name and acknowledging that his widow owed nothing, a document that finally released Clara from the shadow that had haunted her for months. The revelation that Catherine Lewis was actually Clara Reed caused a brief stir in Placerville. But to Clara's surprise and gratitude, the town's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Judge Wilson's public endorsement certainly helped, as did the testimony of her students' parents about the positive changes they had seen in their children under her guidance. "We don't care what name you use," Mrs. Anderson declared at an impromptu meeting of parents held at the schoolhouse. "Our children have learned more in a few weeks with you than in months with others. We want you to stay." The school board formally offered Clara the teaching position under her real name, with an increase in salary that acknowledged both her skills and the hardships she had endured. It was a moment of vindication that brought tears to her eyes, the final confirmation that she had indeed found a home in Placerville. Throughout the tumultuous days that followed Hammond's confrontation, Levy remained a steadfast presence, neither pushing for more than Clara was ready to give nor withdrawing the promise of his earlier words. They found moments to talk between her teaching duties and his management of the saloon, gradually sharing the parts of themselves that had been held in reserve, while Clara lived as Catherine Lewis. Clara learned about Levy's past, how he had come west as a young man fleeing his own troubles, how the saloon had been a last-chance investment when his mining efforts failed, how he had slowly built both a business and a reputation through hard work and fair dealings. In turn, she shared more of her life before Thomas, her childhood in Missouri, her dreams of education that had led her to teaching, her complex feelings about a marriage that had offered adventure but little companionship. As summer gave way to autumn, their relationship deepened from friendship to something more profound. They began taking Sunday afternoon rides into the hills surrounding Placerville, enjoying picnic lunches while discussing books or town gossip, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes, they would bring along student papers for Clara to grade, Levy offering insights that surprised her with their perceptiveness. "You would have made a good teacher yourself," she observed one golden October afternoon as they sat beneath an oak tree whose leaves had turned a brilliant crimson. Levy chuckled, stretching his long legs before him. "Maybe in another life. This one seems to have worked out well enough." His expression grew more serious as he gazed at her. Especially recently. The warmth in his eyes made Clara's heart quicken, as it increasingly did in his presence. Over the past months, their touches had grown more frequent, a hand helping her down from a wagon, fingers brushing as they shared a book, a steadying arm around her waist when she slipped on rain-slicked boards outside the schoolhouse. Each contact sent a thrill through Clara that she had never experienced with Thomas, whose courtship had been conducted primarily through poetic letters rather than physical presence. With Levy, she was discovering a different kind of connection, one built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and a physical awareness that both exhilarated and occasionally flustered her. "Clara," Levy said softly, breaking into her thoughts, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She turned to face him fully, noting the unusual hesitancy in his manner. "Yes, the harvest dance is next Saturday," he began, referring to the annual celebration that marked the end of the agricultural season. "I was wondering if you might consider attending with me, officially." He cleared his throat. "As my guest, rather than just happening to speak with me there." The distinction was significant. Attending the dance together would be a public declaration of their relationship, a statement to the town that Levy Crawford and Clara Reed were courting. "I would be honored," Clara replied, a smile spreading across her face. "In fact, I was hoping you would ask." Relief and pleasure mingled in Levy's expression. "You were. Martha has been dropping hints for weeks about how handsome you look in your Sunday suit," Clara admitted with a laugh. "I believe she was trying to ensure I wouldn't refuse if you gathered the courage to ask." "Meddling woman," Levy said with fond exasperation. "Though I suppose I should thank her for her efforts." "You should," Clara agreed, feeling a lightness that had become increasingly familiar in his company. "She's become quite invested in our happiness." "And what about you?" Levy asked, his voice growing serious again. "Are you invested in our happiness, Clara?" The question carried weight beyond the immediate context of the dance invitation. Clara held his gaze, allowing herself to acknowledge the depth of feeling that had been growing within her. "I am," she said simply. "More than I ever expected to be again." Levy's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that felt both new and somehow inevitable. "When you came to Placerville, you said you had nothing to give," he reminded her. "I hope you know now how wrong you were." Clara squeezed his hand, emotion tightening her throat. "I'm beginning to understand that," she admitted, "though I still marvel at how much I've received in return." They sat together as the afternoon light filtered through autumn leaves, neither feeling the need to rush what was developing between them. After the tumult of the past year, there was a precious peace in allowing their relationship to unfold at its own pace. The night of the harvest dance arrived crisp and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Clara dressed with particular care, wearing a deep blue gown that Martha had helped her alter from one of Catherine Lewis's more subdued dresses. With her hair arranged in soft curls rather than the severe style she had adopted as the schoolteacher, she looked and felt more like herself than she had in months. Levy arrived at Martha's promptly at 7, his tall frame resplendent in a well-tailored black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His gray eyes widened appreciatively as Clara descended the stairs, a flush of pleasure warming her cheeks at his obvious admiration. "You are beautiful," he said simply, offering her a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. "Thank you," Clara replied, equally affected by his appearance. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Crawford." Martha, watching from the parlor doorway, made no attempt to hide her approval. "You make a handsome couple," she declared, waving away their thanks for her help with preparations. "Now go enjoy yourselves. And Levy," she fixed him with a stern look that didn't quite hide her affection, "have her home at a decent hour." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion. Harvest decorations adorning every surface and a small orchestra assembled on a raised platform at one end. As Levy escorted Clara into the room, heads turned and conversations paused, not with the suspicion that had once greeted Catherine Lewis, but with the interested speculation of a community watching a courtship unfold in their midst. Judge Wilson approached them immediately, his granddaughter Sarah in tow. The girl had become one of Clara's favorite pupils, her quick mind and curious nature making her a joy to teach. "Miss Reed," Sarah exclaimed, using the name Clara now used professionally, though many still occasionally slipped and called her Mrs. Lewis. "You look like a princess," Clara laughed, bending slightly to speak to the child at eye level. "Thank you, Sarah. You look quite lovely yourself." The judge's eyes twinkled as he observed the exchange. "Sarah insisted on staying up past her bedtime to see you arrive with Mr. Crawford," he confided. "She's been quite certain for some time that you two would make a perfect match." "Grandpa," Sarah protested, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Children often see what adults try to conceal," Levy remarked good-naturedly, offering Sarah a conspiratorial wink that restored her smile. As the evening progressed, Clara found herself truly relaxing into the festivities for the first time since arriving in Placerville. She danced not only with Levy, but with Judge Wilson, the town mayor, and several fathers of her students, all while aware of Levy's gaze following her around the room, not possessively, but with a warm attentiveness that made her feel both protected and cherished. During a pause between dances, as they stood by the refreshment table sharing a cup of punch, Clara noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Conversations hushed briefly, then resumed with increased animation as all eyes turned toward the entrance. Jasper Hammond stood in the doorway, his bulky frame uncomfortably constrained in formal attire. He looked thinner than when Clara had last seen him, the strain of the past months evident in the new lines etched on his face. Beside him stood his wife, a pale woman whom Clara had never met but whose nervous demeanor suggested years of living with Hammond's volatile nature. "I didn't expect him to show his face here," Levy murmured, his posture tensing slightly. "He still owns property in Placerville," Clara reminded him. "And the judge's agreement allows him to maintain his legitimate business interests while the restitution process continues. Legal right or not, it takes gall to appear at a community celebration after what he's done," Levy observed, his tone making it clear what he thought of Hammond's decision. Clara watched as the crowd subtly divided, some turning their backs pointedly while others offered minimal acknowledgement. Hammond's wife looked increasingly uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the room as though seeking an escape. "She's suffering for his sins," Clara said quietly. "That hardly seems fair." Levy followed her gaze, his expression softening slightly. "You're right. Though I'm not sure I could be so generous in your position." A sudden impulse seized Clara, one that surprised her with its clarity. "I'm going to speak to them," she decided, setting down her punch cup with determination, Levy's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not," Clara admitted, "but I need to do this for myself more than for them." She touched his arm reassuringly. "I'll be fine. Hammond can hardly cause a scene here surrounded by the entire town." Before Levy could object further, Clara made her way across the room, conscious of the ripple of whispers that followed her progress. Hammond saw her coming, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness as she approached. "Mr. Hammond," Clara greeted him with calm dignity. "Mrs. Hammond." "Good evening." Hammond's wife looked startled at being addressed directly, while Hammond himself struggled to maintain his composure. "Miss Reid," he acknowledged stiffly. "I didn't expect you would want to speak to me." "Nor did I," Clara admitted candidly. "But I've found that expectations can change, given time and reflection." She turned to Mrs. Hammond with a genuine smile. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Clara Reid, the town's teacher." "Eleanor Hammond," the woman replied hesitantly, her pale blue eyes regarding Clara with confusion. I've heard about your situation. I'm sorry for any difficulty Jasper's business dealings may have caused you." The careful phrasing suggested Eleanor knew more than she acknowledged publicly perhaps, even understood the true nature of her husband's activities. Clara felt a surprising surge of compassion for this woman who had likely spent years making similar careful statements to preserve a facade of respectability. "Thank you," Clara said simply. "That means a great deal." She turned back to Hammond, whose expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable. "I wanted you to know, Mr. Hammond, that I don't harbor resentment. What happened between us is being resolved through proper channels, and I've found a new life here that I value greatly." Hammond stared at her, clearly struggling to reconcile this composed woman with the desperate widow he had pursued so relentlessly. "I appreciate that," he said finally, the words sounding as though they had been dragged unwillingly from somewhere deep within him. Clara nodded, having said what she came to say. "Enjoy the evening," she offered, the civility of the statement masking the finality of the encounter. She had not come to forgive Hammond. Some actions were beyond simple forgiveness, but to demonstrate to him, to herself, and to the watching town that he no longer held power over her life or happiness. As she turned to go, Eleanor Hammond reached out impulsively, her thin fingers touching Clara's arm. "Miss Reid," she said in a low voice that wouldn't carry beyond their immediate circle, "I admire your courage, more than you know." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that Clara understood instinctively. With a brief nod of acknowledgement, she returned to Levy, who had watched the exchange with barely concealed concern. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, scanning her face for signs of distress. "I am," Clara replied, surprised to find it was entirely true. "Better than I expected, actually." She glanced back at the Hammonds, who were making their way to a far corner of the room where they would attract less attention. "I think I needed that moment to truly believe this chapter of my life is closed." Levy's expression warmed with understanding, ready to begin the next one. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Clara took his offered hand with a smile that answered his question more eloquently than words could have done. They moved onto the dance floor, Levy's arm strong and sure around her waist as he guided her through the familiar steps. "You know," he said conversationally as they circled the floor, "I've been thinking about expanding my business interests." Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unexpected topic. "Oh, in what direction?" "The building next to the saloon is for sale," Levy explained. "It would make an excellent cafe somewhere respectable where ladies could dine without entering the saloon proper." His eyes held a question as they met hers. "I thought perhaps you might have opinions on what such an establishment should offer." Clara considered the idea, understanding the implicit invitation in his words. "I do have some thoughts," she admitted, "though my experience is limited to enjoying such places rather than running them." "That's valuable perspective," Levy assured her, "and I value your judgment in all matters." He hesitated, then added more softly, "I'd like you to be involved in my future plans, Clara, in whatever capacity feels right to you." The waltz ended, but they remained on the floor, the moment between them too important to break by returning to the crowded edges of the room. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Levy Crawford?" Clara inquired, her heart beating faster despite her outwardly calm demeanor. A smile touched his lips, not the full transformation she loved, but a softer, more intimate version meant only for her. "Not quite yet," he admitted. "When I do, it won't be in the middle of a harvest dance with half the town watching. But I am asking if you might be open to such a question, when the time is right." Clara felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed her of speech. This man, this steady, honorable man who had given her a chance when she believed she had nothing left, was offering her a future she had stopped believing might be possible. "Yes," she said finally, the simple word carrying all the certainty of her heart. "When the time is right, I would be very open to such a question." Levy's smile deepened, his gray eyes alight with a joy that matched her own. As the orchestra began another dance, he drew her closer than strict propriety might dictate, his voice a warm murmur against her ear. "Then we'll begin as we mean to continue," he promised, "building something together, one day at a time." As they moved in perfect harmony across the floor, Clara felt the last pieces of her new life falling into place. From a desperate woman with nothing to give, she had become someone with not only purpose and place, but the promise of a love she had never expected to find. The winter months brought changes to Placerville, a dusting of snow that transformed the rugged landscape, holiday celebrations that Clara entered into with genuine joy, and a deepening of her relationship with Levy that felt as natural as the changing seasons. True to his word, Levy purchased the building adjacent to his saloon and began renovations to create the cafe he had envisioned. Clara found herself spending evenings with him, poring over plans and offering suggestions about everything from the menu to the decor. The project became a shared vision, a tangible representation of the future they were building together. Christmas arrived with a festivity Clara hadn't experienced since childhood. Her students performed a holiday recitation that brought proud tears to parents' eyes, and the town organized a celebration that included carols, gifts, and a community dinner, where Clara found herself seated between Levy and Judge Wilson, surrounded by people who had become more than neighbors. They were friends, even family of a sort. Martha hosted a smaller gathering at the boarding house on Christmas Eve, inviting only Clara, Levy, and the judge's family. After a sumptuous meal and the exchange of modest gifts, Clara and Levy found themselves momentarily alone in the parlor, while the others debated the merits of various Christmas pudding recipes in the dining room. "I have one more gift for you," Levy said quietly, removing a small package from his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately." Clara accepted the carefully wrapped parcel, her fingers trembling slightly as she untied the ribbon. Inside, she found a small velvet box, and within it, a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Levy," she breathed, looking up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "I said I would ask when the time was right," he reminded her, taking the ring from the box and holding it between them. "Clara Reed, I love you. I have since that first day when you said you had nothing to give, and I saw the courage and strength you couldn't yet see in yourself." He took her hand gently. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had anticipated this moment since their conversation at the harvest dance, the reality of it, Levy's heartfelt words, the perfect simplicity of the ring, the depth of feeling evident in every line of his face overwhelmed Clara with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, joy suffusing her entire being. "Yes, Levy Crawford, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise contained in their shared future. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Clara rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never expected this," she admitted softly. "When I arrived in Placerville, I was just trying to survive. I never imagined I would find a home, a purpose." "And you?" Levy's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes the best gifts are the ones we don't know to ask for," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "You gave me a chance to be more than just the saloon keeper, to be a partner, a protector, a better man than I thought I could be." Their private moment was interrupted by Martha's deliberate cough from the doorway. "I see," he finally asked, she observed, her stern expression belied by the tears glistening in her eyes. "About time, too. The whole town's been waiting since October." The news of their engagement spread through Placerville with the speed that only small-town connections could achieve. By New Year's Day, Clara had received congratulations from virtually everyone she encountered, along with numerous offers of assistance with wedding preparations. They set the date for early spring, April 15th, when the winter's chill would have yielded to warmer days, but before the intense heat of summer descended on the town. The cafe's renovation was scheduled to be completed by then as well, allowing them to begin their married life with both personal and professional new beginnings. Hammond's restitution process continued throughout this period, with periodic updates from Judge Wilson about funds being returned to those who had been defrauded. Clara received her own settlement in February, not a fortune, but enough to provide security and some modest comforts as she began her new life with Levy. "What will you do with it?" Levy asked when she showed him the bank draft. Clara had given the matter considerable thought. "Some will go toward our future, of course," she said, "but I'd like to use part of it to establish a scholarship fund for students who wish to continue their education beyond what our school can provide." Levy's expression softened with pride and affection. "Always the teacher," he observed, drawing her into his arms. "It's a wonderful idea." As their wedding day approached, Clara found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. From the desperate flight from Sacramento to the confrontation with Hammond, from hidden fugitive to respected teacher, from lonely widow to beloved fiancé, each step had seemed impossible until it was accomplished, each challenge insurmountable until it was overcome. The morning of April 15th dawned clear and perfect, with wildflowers blooming across the hills surrounding Placerville, and a gentle breeze carrying the promise of renewed life. In Martha's best guest room, Clara prepared for her wedding day with the help of her landlady and several of the town's women who had become dear friends over the past months. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, commissioned from Sacramento's finest dressmaker as a gift from Judge Wilson and his wife. Her hair was arranged in soft curls adorned with tiny spring blossoms, and around her neck hung a pendant that had once belonged to her mother, the one treasure she had managed to keep through all her trials. "You look radiant," Martha declared, uncharacteristic emotion making her voice rough as she adjusted Clara's veil. "Levy Crawford won't know what hit him." The ceremony took place in the town's small church, filled beyond capacity with well-wishers. Judge Wilson had the honor of escorting Clara down the aisle, where Levy waited with an expression of such wonder and joy that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. Their vows were simple and heartfelt promises to cherish, support, and honor each other through whatever life might bring. As Levy slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, Clara felt the completion of a circle that had begun on that desperate day when she'd first stumbled into his saloon. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared to the beaming assembly. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Levy's kiss was tender yet full of promise, a perfect balance of restraint and passion that left Clara slightly breathless as they turned to face their cheering friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Crawford for the first time. The celebration continued at the newly completed cafe, its doors opened specifically for this occasion before its official business launch the following week. The space was transformed with flowers and ribbons, tables laden with food and drink, and an area cleared for dancing. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the cafe's garden, creating a magical atmosphere for the continuing festivities. Clara and Levy moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and sharing their happiness with the community that had embraced them both. "Mrs. Crawford," Levy murmured during a rare quiet moment when they found themselves alone near the garden's edge. "How does it feel?" Clara smiled up at her husband, the words still new and wonderful in her mind. "It feels right," she replied simply. "Like coming home after a very long journey." Levy's arms encircled her waist as he drew her closer. "That's exactly what it is," he agreed. "A homecoming for both of us." As they rejoined the celebration, Clara caught sight of her students playing in the garden, their laughter a reminder of the life she had built in Placerville. She saw Martha directing the serving of the wedding cake with her usual efficiency, Judge Wilson dancing with his granddaughter, the townspeople who had become her friends enjoying the happiness of the day. This was her world now, not the life she had expected or planned, but one infinitely more precious for having been found when she believed she had nothing left to give. Levy had asked only for a chance, and in giving it, she had received more than she had ever imagined possible. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the small house that would be their home, Levy lifted her into his arms to carry her across the threshold in the time-honored tradition. "Welcome home, Clara Crawford," he said softly, his gray eyes filled with a love that still humbled her with its steadiness and depth. "Home," she echoed, the word encompassing not just the physical structure but all they had built and would continue to build together. "I like the sound of that." As the door closed behind them, Clara knew with absolute certainty that the chapters ahead, whatever joys or challenges they might contain, would be faced together, with the same courage and faith that had brought them to this perfect moment. She had arrived in Placerville believing she had nothing to give. Levy had asked only for a chance. Together, they had found everything.